Now, Robert, how has this case ended up in front of a US congressional committee in the first place?
Oh, thanks for having me. And I think it's kind of interesting that it took this long for TikTok to get there. Most major incumbent social media networks, from Meta through Twitter and other platforms, have been pulled before Congress on multiple occasions, and have had similarly aggressive lines of questions put at them. So it's taken quite a bit longer than people expected for TikTok to be ready to present itself before the US Congress for these sorts of questions.
Well, how did Shou Zichu do in defending his company's relationship with China and convincing the company that TikTok is safe for young users?
Well, I think he was on very solid ground when he was discussing assumptions around the identity of the people who work at TikTok. So he was questioned as to the degree to which China might influence him because he's Chinese, and he pointed out that actually he's Singaporean. So assumptions about the leadership structure of TikTok, he was on very strong ground there when he was defending his company. But he was on much shakier ground when it came to being very precise about accounting for TikTok's record of surveillance and censorship and its relationship with the Communist Party of China. I don't think some of his questions satisfied the committees and will probably cause him more trouble going forward than perhaps better answers might have produced.
Well, how significant is it that a TikTok chief executive is being made to give testimony in front of the committee?
I think it's hugely important because it shows that TikTok now that it's reached the incumbency period, it's now a very large platform in the United States and other countries. And now it's getting the same sort of questions that Twitter got. You've seen Mark Zuckerberg get turned into a robot on national television when getting significantly aggressive queries from these same senators and congressmen. But some of his answers, because of the geopolitical question around ByteDance and the context that China is in and of itself having an internal debate over how it should govern its platforms, including TikTok. I think some of his answers weren't particularly good. I thought his answer around free market capitalism was particularly horrible because he's saying, that shutting down TikTok in the United States would be anti-free market, but that's just not something I think the American electorate is going to accept, given that Meta and Twitter are banned in China. So he's given the benefit of having a monopoly at home and a huge revenue base in China that his competitors can't go for. And he's making complaints about his level of access to the United States when he's on a very unfair playing field there. He also did not give particularly good answers around whether or not the Chinese Communist Party could access user data. He didn't give particularly good answers around whether or not they were spying on users. I think he said, well, we wouldn't call it spying, which means that there is some very significant stuff going on there that he's aware of that he's not in a hurry to expose to public scrutiny. And his company's been caught a few times, including surveilling journalists using the TikTok platform. They surveilled Emily Baker White from Forbes using the application in order to try and find her sources within the company. And they were caught handing US and Australian user data to employees within China in the past, and they had to come clean on that after parliamentary scrutiny. So he's got the downside of having a number of scandals to explain to these senators and congressmen, and he didn't do a particularly good job of that. But where he was very strong was in presenting his company as an international company that's willing to talk about what it's doing, and Shou is a very competent chief executive.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes from this. But the demand is that TikTok sell its Chinese-owned shares or face that ban in the US. What do you think will likely happen?
I think it's unlikely that ByteDance would be prepared to give up its controlling interest in TikTok. For additional context, the original founder of ByteDance was pushed out as part of the Chinese government's crackdown on tech companies. So he was quite pro Xi Jinping, actually. He'd been on the record saying that he wanted his company to reflect authentic socialist values on the platform. But that wasn't enough to keep him in his job, and he was actually pushed out along with a number of other major tech founders. So there's this push-pull with two superpowers trying to control this platform. And we're seeing the American side of this debate at the moment, where there's a very real and aggressive conversation happening in China about its relationship here. And one of the more pertinent facts is that TikTok as a platform is banned in China already. the level of freedom on the platform isn't something that the Chinese government is prepared to accept. And when we explored the application and looked at the user data that it was collecting, the TikTok app was actually collecting more private data than the Douyin version, which runs in China. So China actually more closely regulates TikTok as a whole platform than is currently practiced in places like Australia or the United States.
It's fascinating. So how popular is TikTok in the US? How many users are there, and what would be the impact on its business if the ban was enforced?
Well, they claim hundreds of millions of users, but they don't release specific data. But it is an incredibly popular application that is often the most downloaded platform out of the app stores, both Google and Apple itself.
Robert Potter, thank you so much for joining us on The World Tonight. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.